I'm Callan Rivera, 33, a financial advisor in Denver, for years. I quietly paid off my sister's debt, helped my parents with bills, and said yes to every family favor. Then one day, I got a mortgage statement in the mail. $480,000 on a house I'd never seen, signed in my name. When I confronted them, my mother didn't deny it. She said, "Family means sacrifice." And as I stood to leave, she looked me in the eye and warned, "If you walk out that door, don't come back." I walked out anyway, before I share how they sued me and how I took back my name and my future. Let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been guilted into carrying someone else's weight in the name of family, drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe for more real stories like this one. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, in a 2-story house with a lilac bush in the front yard and a tire swing in the back. Things that might suggest a happy, balanced childhood. From the outside, we looked like any other middle-class family. My father, Martin, worked as a district manager for a grocery chain. My mother, Veronica, ran a local arts program at the community center. And then there was me, Callan, the firstborn. 4 years later came Laya, my younger sister, my parents' light, as they often called her. I can't remember a time when things ever felt equal between us. Though I didn't have the words for it then. I just knew that when I brought home straight A's, my father would nod, maybe say keep it up, and that was that. But when Leia scraped by with a C in algebra, she got balloons, hugs, and a celebratory dinner at her favorite Thai place. When I learned to ride a bike, no one took pictures. But when Leia wobbled down the sidewalk with training wheels still attached, my mother clapped like she'd just won gold at the Olympics. At 6, I was told to help clear the dinner table, fold laundry, feed the dog. At 10, I was watching Laya after school while my parents worked late. They said I was mature for my age, which I now understand meant convenient. Laya, meanwhile, never had chores. If she forgot to pack her lunch, Mom would rush home to bring it. If I forgot, I went hungry, and they'd say it was a learning opportunity. There were gifts, too. On my 16th birthday, I got a second-hand bicycle with faded pink handlebars. The day Laya turned 16, they surprised her with a brand-new compact SUV, complete with a red ribbon and matching insurance card. When I asked why the difference, my mother simply said, "Well, you're so independent. You didn't need much." That phrase, "you didn't need much," would echo through much of my life, as if resilience was a reason to withhold affection, not admire it. Still, I tried not to take it personally. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was just more serious, more capable, and that's why they expected more. I buried the questions that kept rising. Why was it a celebration when Leia succeeded, and a standard when I did? Why did my effort feel invisible? While her attempts were met with applause the older I got, the more it settled in I was the steady one, the strong one, the one who made things easier by not needing anything. And they leaned into that narrative, handed it to me like a baton in a race I never asked to run. But even strength has limits. And though I never said it aloud, not even to myself, I think a part of me hoped that if I just kept excelling, if I kept doing the right thing, being the reliable one, they'd eventually see me the way they saw her, not just as the one who could handle everything, but as someone who deserved to be cared for, too. That hope stayed quiet, but it lived there, just beneath the surface, like a small flicker waiting to be acknowledged. By the time I turned 18, I had stopped hoping for equal treatment. I didn't stop wanting it, but I no longer expected it. So when college applications came around, I didn't ask my parents for help. I knew better. While Laya was still in middle school, arguing with Mom about how many sequins were too many for a birthday dress, I was filling out FAFSA forms alone at the kitchen table, balancing AP homework with shifts at the local bookstore. I was accepted to the University of Washington in Seattle, my dream school, and awarded a partial academic scholarship. It wasn't enough to cover everything, so I took out loans. I picked up 2 part-time jobs, mornings at the campus cafe, evenings at the library's circulation desk. On weekends, I cleaned offices downtown. I learned how to stretch $20 for a week of groceries and how to stay awake through lectures on 3 hours of sleep. It wasn't easy, but it was mine, and in that, there was a kind of quiet pride. My parents didn't visit once during those 4 years. They sent no care packages, made no surprise visits. Occasionally, my mother would call, always about Laya. She misses you, she'd say. Or, she's having a tough time adjusting to high school. They never asked how I was managing, or whether I needed anything. I stopped volunteering information. I figured if I wanted my independence, I had to accept the loneliness that came with it. Meanwhile, Laya had become the center of their orbit when she started college 2 years later, at a private liberal arts school in Oregon. My parents were beaming. They paid her full tuition without blinking, covered her rent, bought her a MacBook Pro and a set of pastel-colored luggage. I saw the photos on social media, my father moving her into her dorm room, my mother standing proudly beside her. I didn't feel jealous. I felt erased. Leia didn't last long. She left her first school after 3 semesters, saying she wasn't passionate about anything yet. My parents told everyone she was taking a gap year to travel and find herself, though she mostly stayed in Boulder, working part-time at a juice bar. The following year, she enrolled at another university, this time in Arizona. Again, everything was paid for. Again, she didn't finish. By the time she turned 23, she had dropped out of 3 different colleges, each one more expensive than the last. My parents had spent well over $150,000 on her education, while I was still chipping away at my loans, paying interest on every meal I'd ever skipped and every winter coat I couldn't afford. They never once asked her to contribute, never once held her accountable. When I brought it up, gently, carefully, my father shrugged and said, "She's just finding her path," as if I'd been born knowing mine. And yet, I said nothing. I didn't explode, didn't confront, I just adjusted. I tightened the belt a little more. I calculated my future in semesters and shift hours. I paid my rent late more than once, skipped dentist appointments, and took notes on borrowed textbooks when mine were too expensive to buy. I worked through holidays when I couldn't afford the flight home. The library where I shelved books became the closest thing I had to safety. The silence of those aisles matched the one I carried inside. But I never complained. Not once. Because deep down, I still believed that being the strong one meant you didn't get to ask for help. That being responsible meant you swallowed your frustration, straightened your spine, and kept going. I didn't know. Then, that resilience without support is just quiet suffering in disguise. At graduation, I stood alone in the crowd, surrounded by families cheering for their children. I spotted Laya and my parents in the bleachers, late, of course, and already distracted. They waved when I looked up, but it felt like they were clapping for a stranger. Still, I smiled. I smiled for the photographers, for the university, for the image of a daughter who had made it on her own. It took 5 years after that to pay off my student loans. 5 years of cramped apartments, instant noodles, and holidays spent working overtime. But I did it. I built something solid from the scraps I was given. And while Leia floated from one failed dream to the next, I built my life one spreadsheet, one paycheck, one quiet triumph at a time. I told myself it didn't matter if they never saw it, so long as I knew. But part of me still wondered, if I had done all of this with support, how much further could I have gone? That question lingered, not as bitterness, but as proof. Proof that I had always been capable. Proof that I had never needed permission to rise. After graduation, I didn't take a break, not even for a weekend. While some of my classmates celebrated with cross-country trips or new wardrobes funded by proud parents, I boarded a one-way flight back to Colorado and started work that Monday at a financial firm in downtown Denver. Entry-level, modest pay, long hours. But it was a beginning. It felt like standing on my own 2 feet, even if those feet were sore and often crammed into discount heels from last season's sale rack. I found a tiny studio apartment just outside the city. No air conditioning, barely enough space for a table, but it was mine. I budgeted like my life depended on it, because it did. Every dollar had a destination. I meal prepped rice and beans, tracked expenses on color-coded spreadsheets, and spent Friday nights balancing my accounts instead of going out. It was a quiet, disciplined kind of living, the kind that doesn't make for exciting stories, but it built the foundation I needed. Within 5 years, I'd earned 2 promotions, moved into a one-bedroom unit with a real closet, and, most importantly, paid off my student loans. I still remember the day I submitted that final payment. I sat on my thrift store couch, laptop open, watching the confirmation screen refresh, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to really celebrate with. But I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of grocery store wine, and whispered, "You did it." Meanwhile, Leia had cycled through 6 different jobs in as many years: retail, receptionist, a brief stint selling essential oils. None of them stuck. She moved back in with our parents more than once, always greeted with open arms and freshly made beds. Veronica would say things like, "She just hasn't found her calling yet," as if failing upward were a form of spiritual exploration. At first, I thought nothing of it. That was their choice, their money. But slowly, the tone began to shift. It started small. My mom calling one night, casual as ever. "Leia's car broke down. I know you're good with numbers. Sweetheart, do you think you could help cover the repair just this once?" I sent the money, told myself it was no big deal. Then came another call. This time, from my dad. "Leia wants to take a trip with her friends, but money's tight. Maybe you could gift it to her for her birthday." Her birthday was in 4 months. I said yes. Again. Soon. The requests stopped sounding like requests. They became assumptions. My mom would say things like, "Leia's rent is coming up, and you know how unstable her work has been." As if that sentence was a complete thought, an invoice, wrapped in guilt. There was no discussion, no question, just the quiet, unspoken rule: Callan has enough. She can spare it. And in a way, they were right. I could spare it, sometimes. But it wasn't the money that wore me down. It was the implication beneath each ask: "You owe us this, you owe her this. Because you were born capable, because you didn't need us, because you made it." And she didn't. Family dinners became tightrope walks. If I mentioned a raise or a new investment, the conversation shifted to Leia's credit card debt. If I shared a career milestone, my mom would sigh and say, "I just wish Leia could catch a break." The message was always the same: "Your success is only valid if you use it to rescue your sister." I wanted to push back. I wanted to say, "She's not drowning. She's never been asked to swim." But I didn't. I smiled, nodded, picked up the check. I told myself I was keeping the peace. But really, I was keeping the illusion alive, that I was strong enough to carry everyone without bending. That being the responsible one meant being the resource. And somewhere in that pattern, something quietly shifted inside me. I stopped sharing. I stopped volunteering my joys. I became the background music to their drama, reliable, unnoticed, and expected to play on cue. I began to wonder how much of my success was mine, and how much of it was already spoken for, by people who saw it not as an achievement, but as a debt owed. I kept giving, even when it scraped against my boundaries. I told myself I was being generous. But generosity without consent, that's not giving. That's sacrifice. And sacrifice, when expected, stops being noble and starts becoming something else entirely. Something much harder to name. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring. One of those days where the snow had finally melted, but the air still held onto winter's breath. I'd just gotten home from work, heels off, microwave humming with leftover pasta, when I checked my mail on autopilot, junk flyers, a dental appointment reminder, and then an envelope, thick, official-looking. Return address Aurora Lending. I almost tossed it aside, assuming it was a pre-approved offer or some generic refinance ad. But something about the weight of it made me pause. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out a stack of documents. Pages and pages of mortgage terms, amortization schedules, and closing disclosures. My name was at the top of every page: Callan Rivera, borrower, Aurora Heights, loan amount $480,000, interest rate fixed, term 30 years, monthly payment $2,850. I stared at the numbers, not understanding. I had never applied for a mortgage. I hadn't even been house hunting, and I'd certainly never heard of a property in Aurora Heights. Then I saw it, my signature, slanted, confident, unmistakably mine, except I hadn't signed anything. My breath caught. For a moment, I thought maybe it was some clerical error, a crossed wire, a wrong address. But no, this was my full name, social security number, employment information, and income. All accurate, all perfectly filled in, all, somehow, submitted without my knowledge. I called the customer service line at Aurora Lending, hands trembling, only to get a polite but firm recording our office hours are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I left a voicemail, my voice clipped with panic, barely coherent. There's been a mistake. Fraud, identity theft. Please call me back. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my couch, heart pounding, replaying every financial decision I'd ever made. Had I been hacked? Was someone trying to ruin me? I Googled the property, 247 Summit Lane, Aurora Heights, a 3-bedroom home in a quiet suburb, white shutters, fresh sod, Zillow estimate just shy of $500,000. It was real, the house existed, and it was legally mine, at least on paper. The next morning, I skipped work and called Aurora Lending the moment they opened. After 40 minutes of being transferred from department to department, I finally got a senior loan officer on the line. I explained everything. She pulled up the file, clicked through my information, and confirmed what I feared most: the mortgage had already closed. The funds had been disbursed. The property was legally tied to my name. "I'm sorry, Miss Rivera," she said. "If this wasn't you, it sounds like you may be the victim of fraud. You'll need to submit a formal dispute and affidavit. I'll email you the forms." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Did you get the mortgage papers?" she asked, as casually as if she were asking whether I'd received a birthday card. I froze. "What are you talking about?" I said, voice sharp, panic giving way to disbelief. "What papers? Why is my name on a house I've never seen?" "That's what we need to talk about," she replied. "Your father and I were going to call a family dinner. Can you come by tonight? Laya will be there too." "No. Mom. Tell me now. Is this some kind of mistake? Did you?" I couldn't even finish the sentence. My mind was already racing to the only conclusion that made sense, though it made no sense at all. "Don't be so dramatic," she sighed. "It's a family matter. We'll explain tonight, 6 o'clock." And then she hung up. I sat there, phone in my lap, body numb, outside. The wind rattled the windows, but inside, everything was quiet, except for the sound of my trust fracturing, something I had always feared in the abstract. That my boundaries would one day be violated beyond repair, had just become real, tangible, legal, and it had my parents' fingerprints all over it. It wasn't just a betrayal of money or paperwork, it was something deeper. They hadn't just used my name, they had taken my autonomy, my future, my right to choose. And they had done it quietly, deliberately, without asking, because they assumed I would say yes, or worse, that I wouldn't fight back. The sun was setting as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, the same house where I'd once watched fireflies through my bedroom window, where I'd carved my name into the garage beam with a safety pin, where I had learned, slowly and quietly, that being dependable meant being invisible. Leia's new Honda was already parked out front, the one our parents had co-signed for just 2 years earlier. Everything looked exactly the same, except now, I knew what it cost to keep it that way. When I stepped inside, my mother greeted me with a glass of wine I hadn't asked for, already poured, already waiting. My father gestured toward the armchair across from them like this was a performance, and I'd just walked into the audience. Leia sat on the sofa, quiet, but watching me carefully, like someone bracing for turbulence. I didn't sit. My mother took a long breath, as if preparing for a conversation she thought would be reasonable. "Callan," she began, "we understand you have questions about the mortgage." "Questions?" My voice broke slightly on the word. "You took out a loan in my name, for a house, without telling me." My father leaned forward. "It wasn't a decision we made lightly, but with Leia's employment history, she couldn't qualify. You, on the other hand, you have a solid credit score, steady income. It just made sense." "It made sense," I repeated, stunned. "You forged my signature. You used my financial information. That's not just a mistake. That's fraud." Veronica shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "Don't use words like that. It's not fraud when it's family. It's support. Leia needed a fresh start. This home in Aurora Heights, it's a good neighborhood. Safe, close to her work. She deserves that. And I don't deserve a say in what happens under my name. My hands were shaking now, the wine glass untouched on the coffee table. You didn't ask. You decided. We assumed you'd understand, Martin replied. You've always been the responsible one. You're doing well for yourself. Your sister's never had the same opportunities. She's had every opportunity, I snapped, louder than I meant to. You gave her everything. Every time she fell, you cushioned the landing, and then asked me to help clean up the mess. Laya looked away, her mouth a tight line. I have worked for everything I have, I continued, barely able to breathe. And now you're telling me that's the reason I should give it away. You're being dramatic, my mother said coolly. We're not asking you to give anything away. We just expect you to contribute. That's what family does, my father added. It's not like you're struggling with your salary. The payments won't hurt you. But they weren't your payments to give, I said quietly. You had no right. A long silence settled in the room, thick and unbearable. Then Leia finally spoke. You're always so proud of being independent. Maybe this is your chance to show it really doesn't cost you anything to help someone else. I stared at her. It's always cost me something, I said. You just never noticed. I turned toward the door, unable to stand there another moment. And that's when my mother stood up, walked over, and grabbed my wrist, gently, but with meaning. If you walk out that door tonight, she said, her voice low and sharp, don't expect to walk back in. You will not come back here after disrespecting your family like this. My heart beat so loud I could barely hear her. I looked into her eyes I had once searched for approval, for comfort, for truth, and saw none of those things now. I'm not the one who disrespected this family, I said. You did. You just expected me to stay silent about it. I pulled my arm away, and I walked out. No one followed me. No one called after me, behind me. The door didn't slam, it clicked, clean, final. The air outside was cold, but it was honest. The night I left my parents' house, I drove for hours with no clear destination. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just kept my hands on the wheel, watching the city lights blur past, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But by the time I pulled into the dim parking lot outside my apartment, the weight of it hit me all at once. I wasn't just stunned. I was unmoored. My parents had committed a crime, and they had done it with the confidence of people who believed I wouldn't fight back. The next morning, I called Talia. We'd been friends since college. She was the kind of person who always knew which form to file and which law to cite. When I told her what had happened, she didn't gasp or say she was shocked. She just listened, quietly, carefully, then said, Callan, this is serious. You need legal representation, not later. Now. Talia worked as a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm in Denver, and within the hour, she had me connected to Monica Tran, an attorney in the Financial Crimes Division who agreed to take my case for an initial consultation pro bono. Monica didn't sugarcoat anything. This isn't just a family dispute, she said, flipping through the documents I'd brought. It's mortgage fraud, identity theft. And unless you take immediate legal action to distance yourself, you're on the hook for this loan. I felt sick just hearing the words. I wasn't someone who sued people. I wasn't someone who took her own parents to court. But Monica's voice was calm, anchored. You're not doing this to punish them, she said. You're doing this to protect yourself, together. We drafted a formal cease and desist letter, certified, notarized, and sent with a clear statement I did not authorize the loan. I would not take financial responsibility. And I would pursue every necessary legal route to sever the fraudulent connection between myself and the property in Aurora Heights. 3 days later, my father left me a voicemail. His voice, once so familiar, now sounded like a stranger's, cold, coded in rehearsed authority. Your mother is beside herself, Callan. Laya's devastated. And this tantrum of yours has gone on long enough. You need to grow up and accept your family responsibilities. Call us back so we can resolve this like adults. I didn't call back. Instead, Monica helped me notify the mortgage lender and the county records office. We submitted an affidavit declaring the signature forged, and initiated the process of opening a formal fraud investigation. That's when the retaliation began. My phone lit up with unknown numbers at all hours, my inbox filled with passive-aggressive emails from my mother, alternating between guilt and blame. My workplace received an anonymous complaint questioning my mental stability, suggesting I was lashing out due to untreated emotional trauma. HR saw through it, thankfully, but the damage was psychological. I felt exposed, like nowhere was safe. Then Leia took it public. She posted a video, teary-eyed, softly lit, on every platform she had. She spoke about betrayal, about being abandoned by her only sister when she needed her most, about how hard she'd tried to rebuild her life. She never used my name, but it wasn't subtle. The video went viral within our circle. Old friends shared it. Former classmates left sympathetic comments. Even relatives I hadn't spoken to in years chimed in with platitudes about family first and how sad it is when money divides blood. Then came the GoFundMe. Help Leia stay in her home. The campaign read, it claimed she'd been blindsided, that she'd been promised support and then cruelly cut off. It raised thousands within days. I wanted to scream. Instead, I printed everything out, screenshots, posts, donation links, and handed them to Monica. A week later, I was served court papers. My parents were suing me. The complaint demanded that I assume full financial responsibility for the home in Aurora Heights, $480,000 plus damages. Their argument that I had verbally agreed to support my sister, that this was a binding family commitment, that they had acted as my agents, in good faith. It was absurd. It was infuriating. But it was real. And no matter how little legal merit it held, I was now a defendant in a lawsuit filed by the very people who had raised me, the people who now treated me not as a daughter, but as an asset they thought they owned. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a slow-moving collapse, where nothing breaks all at once, but everything feels slightly less stable every day. At work, I became the center of quiet whispers. Someone had sent emails to my colleagues, anonymous, vague, implying I was involved in a serious family legal dispute. A client meeting was rescheduled without explanation. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon, his expression caught between concern and HR protocol. "Just checking in," he said gently. "Let us know if you need time." I nodded, smiled, told him I was fine. I wasn't. At home, the silence wasn't much better. I stopped sleeping through the night. Some mornings, I'd wake up gasping, convinced I'd missed a payment or that the sheriff was coming to repossess a house I didn't even live in. I lost weight without trying. I stopped going to yoga. I stopped replying to texts. I felt like a ghost in my own life. The financial strain tightened like a rope. Monica had done all she could during the early stages. But now that a formal lawsuit had been filed, I needed a litigation attorney. Someone who could navigate the courtroom, push back against the strategy my parents were clearly prepared to use not to win legally, but to drain me emotionally and financially until I gave up. Talia gave me 3 names. I met with all of them, and I chose Daniel Cortez. He was quiet, methodical, and carried a kind of focused intensity that made you feel like he already knew how this would end. He just needed time to prove it. "I've handled cases like this before," he said. "Not always in the family context, but the tactics are familiar. Financial coercion, legal intimidation, manufactured guilt. The retainer was $10,000, almost every dollar of my emergency fund. I wired it the next day. By then, my credit score had already taken a hit. Even though the fraud investigation was ongoing, the mortgage remained in my name. Technically delinquent, it affected everything: my ability to refinance, my rental applications, even my insurance premiums. The walls were closing in from every direction, and I still hadn't fully processed the emotional fallout, not just the betrayal, but the loss, the finality of it, the realization that my parents had made a decision not just to deceive me, but to punish me for objecting. One night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by legal documents, unopened bills, and printouts of Laya's social media posts, pictures of her smiling in the house I was being sued for. So blessed. One caption read, "When you're loved, you thrive." That's when the spiral nearly won. I remember thinking maybe it wasn't worth it. Maybe I should just pay the mortgage, absorb the debt, keep my job, keep my peace. Maybe it wasn't worth burning the last bridges I had left. But then, something shifted, not all at once, just a quiet clarity that rose from somewhere deeper than exhaustion. This wasn't about a house anymore, or a loan, or even a lawsuit. It was about something I had never dared to claim before. Not in childhood, not in college, not even in my early adulthood. It was about my right to say no, my right to protect what I had built, my right to exist without being consumed by people who insisted love meant sacrifice. Always mine, never theirs. I picked up my phone and texted Daniel. I want to fight this, I wrote, all the way. His response came quickly. Good. Then let's begin. The courthouse in downtown Denver stood like a stone monument to accountability. Tall, gray, indifferent, on the morning of the hearing. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a navy suit that felt more like armor than clothing. Daniel Cortez met me at the entrance, calm as always, briefcase in hand. Today's about facts, he said as we walked through security. Let their emotions speak loud. Ours will speak clear. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined, more intimate, almost too intimate for what was about to unfold. On the opposite side of the gallery, my parents sat beside their attorney, Veronica in a pale blue blouse, clutching a handkerchief like it was a prop. Martin sat rigid, jaw locked, and Leah, in a muted cardigan, looked everywhere except at me. The judge, Alana Monroe, entered right on time. Her presence filled the room, not loud but commanding, late 50s, silver hair pulled into a tight knot, and eyes that scanned every movement like they didn't miss a thing. We're here on the defendant's motion to dismiss, she said, her voice precise. Mr. Cortez, you may begin. Daniel stood and buttoned his jacket. Your Honor, this case is not about a misunderstanding. It is not about family miscommunication. It is about deliberate fraud committed under the pretense of kinship. The plaintiffs forged my client's signature. They misrepresented her consent, and we have the evidence to prove it. He walked the court through the timeline, methodical, measured. He presented the mortgage documents, highlighted the discrepancies in signature style, pointed to the access of personal financial data that had never been authorized. Then he introduced the texts. Exhibit C, he said, handing copies to the clerk. A series of messages between Martin and Veronica Rivera, obtained during discovery. Judge Monroe adjusted her glasses and began to read. In one message, dated weeks before the loan application. My father had written, Callan will never agree to this if we ask her directly. Best to present it as a done deal. She's too practical to let Leah fail once it's finalized. In another. My mother had replied, once the papers are signed and Leah's moved in. What can Callan really do? She's family. She won't let her sister become homeless. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Then came the testimonies. Martin was called first, under oath. He painted our family as close-knit. We've always helped each other, he said, his voice rehearsed. We believed Callan would support her sister like we supported her. There was a verbal understanding. Judge Monroe leaned forward. Mr. Rivera, did you explicitly ask your daughter for permission to take out a mortgage in her name? Martin hesitated. Not in those exact words. So that's a no, she stated flatly. And are you disputing that your wife signed documents in her daughter's name? No, but we didn't think of it as. It is forgery, she said firmly. Legal consent is not a family assumption. Veronica took the stand next. Her voice trembled. She spoke of sacrifice, of sleepless nights worrying about Leah. She called me ungrateful, cold, said I had always put money above family. Daniel objected. The judge sustained it. Then came Leah. She sobbed through her statement, said I'd abandoned her, that I'd weaponized success to punish her for struggling. She never once addressed the mortgage itself, just feelings, guilt, pain, and finally, it was my turn. I took a breath before speaking. I explained how I had put myself through college, how I'd worked 3 jobs, lived below my means, and fought for financial security with no safety net. I told the court I had never agreed to the mortgage, hadn't even known it existed until the documents arrived. Judge Monroe listened. She asked one question. Miss Rivera, have there been previous instances where your parents acted financially in your name without permission? I nodded. Yes. Your Honor. A credit card when I was 19. A tax return filed without my review. Every time. It was justified as just family helping family. She closed the file. Enough. Her tone was calm, but final. This court recognizes the deep complexities of family relationships, she said. But emotional proximity does not supersede legal boundaries. There is no such thing as implied consent to fraud, whether parent or stranger. Forging a signature is a crime. She looked directly at my parents. This is not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated breach of trust, dressed up in the language of sacrifice, and it will not be legitimized here. Then she turned to me. Miss Rivera, your motion to dismiss is under consideration. I will issue a ruling within 10 days. With that, she adjourned, and just like that, it was quiet again. But this time, it was the kind of quiet that came after something true had finally been said out loud. 9 days after the hearing, I was in a conference room at work, halfway through a budget presentation, when my phone buzzed in my blazer pocket. One message, from Daniel. Ruling is in. Call when you can. I don't remember what I said to wrap up that meeting. I just know I walked out with my pulse in my ears and my hands slightly shaking. In the hallway, I called him back, bracing for impact. He didn't ease into it. Judge Monroe granted our motion to dismiss, with prejudice. I closed my eyes. Relief didn't come all at once. It arrived in slow waves, like something thawing after too long in the cold. There's more, he continued. She's ordered your parents to pay $15,000 toward your legal fees, and she granted a temporary restraining order. 90 days. No direct contact from them or Laya. I leaned against the wall, legs weakening beneath me. Daniel paused. And one last thing. She's referring the matter to the district attorney for possible criminal investigation. I didn't speak, not right away, because I didn't know what I felt. Gratitude, vindication, maybe, but also a deep, aching grief for what had been broken and for the pieces I knew could never be put back. That evening, news of the ruling hit the local press. The Denver Ledger ran a headline online: Judge rules against parents in mortgage fraud case involving adult daughter. They didn't name me directly, but it didn't take much to connect the dots. Within hours, my phone was flooded. Missed calls, voicemails, messages from people who had once stood silently on the sidelines. Some apologized. Some defended my parents. Some just wanted gossip. I didn't answer any of them. At 2:13 a.m., I received a voicemail from Laya. Her voice was slurred, thick with tears and what I suspected was more than wine. I hope you're happy now. Mom's had 2 panic attacks. Dad's talking about bankruptcy. I have 30 days to get out of the house. You destroyed everything. Callan, I hope your money keeps you warm. I deleted the message without replaying it. I wouldn't let it poison the one thing I had finally begun to rebuild. My peace. The consequences arrived swiftly. The mortgage company initiated foreclosure proceedings on the Aurora Heights home. Laya moved back in with our parents. A few weeks later, word spread that my father had filed for bankruptcy. Their assets were being liquidated, retirement plans paused, savings drained. None of it felt satisfying. It felt inevitable. The only message that reached me and stayed with me came from Nana Celia. She called once, didn't even leave a voicemail, just sent a handwritten letter in her signature shaky script. Callan, I may not understand all the legal parts, but I believe you. I love you. I always have. And from Uncle Theo, my father's estranged brother, an email. What you did took courage. You're not the first person in this family to be used, but you might be the first to fight back and win. Those 2 voices, quiet and steady, became my lifeline. For a while, I didn't return to social media. I kept my head down. I started seeing a new therapist, someone who didn't ask me to find a middle ground, but who helped me understand that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is walk away. The case was closed. My name was cleared, but the damage, the invisible kind, took longer to settle. I'd won, completely, legally, undeniably. But there were days when it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. And sometimes, That has to be enough. For a while after the ruling, I moved through the world like someone learning how to breathe again. The courtroom victory had severed the legal ties, but the emotional ones, those quiet, unseen threads, took longer to untangle. I started therapy with Dr. Lena Martinez, a psychologist who specialized in family estrangement and financial trauma. At our first session, she didn't ask why I was there. She simply said, "You've been surviving. Let's talk about how to live." That one sentence brought tears I hadn't expected to cry. I think I'd been waiting for someone, not to fix me, but to witness the weight I'd been carrying without judgment. We unpacked everything: the patterns, the silence, the way I'd been conditioned to feel guilty for having boundaries, for protecting what I built. Doctor Martinez gave language to the things I'd only ever felt as unease. Terms like financial abuse, emotional parentification, and legacy guilt. It didn't excuse what my parents had done, but it explained it. And sometimes, understanding is its own form of release. With her guidance, I began rebuilding not just my finances, but my foundation. I moved out of the apartment that had become a war bunker and into a light-filled two-bedroom condo near Sloan's Lake. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Purchased with a loan I reviewed line by line, signed with my own hand, on my own terms. No shadows, no hidden clauses, no ghosts in the paperwork. I also returned to the work I'd once loved. Financial planning had always been more than spreadsheets for me. It was about giving people back their sense of control, their agency. I started leading internal workshops at my firm about financial boundaries, especially for first-gen earners and young professionals from complex family backgrounds. Then, one night, I stumbled across an online support group, SAFE, Survivors of Adult Family Exploitation. At first, I just read stories from people who'd been co-signed into debt, tricked into draining savings, manipulated into silence. One thread stopped me cold: a young woman named Rachel, 23, working retail. Her parents had taken out a car loan in her name, then blamed her when the payments lapsed. She wrote, "I know I sound dramatic, but I feel like I'm losing my mind." I messaged her. We talked, first through the group's chat, then on Zoom, eventually, over coffee in a small cafe tucked between a laundromat and a dry cleaner. Rachel reminded me of myself, not in what she said, but in how she carried herself, shoulders hunched, apologetic for taking up space, still unsure if she had the right to be angry. I walked her through her options: credit freezes, formal fraud affidavits, how to pull a full report from all three bureaus. She took notes in the margins of a napkin. Before we left, she asked quietly, "How did you get past it?" I paused. Because the truth is, I hadn't, not fully, but I had learned how to live forward. I stopped trying to make them understand, I told her, and started trying to understand myself. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation, of voice, of value, of self. Helping Rachel lit a quiet flame in me I didn't know I'd missed. I began volunteering with the support group more formally, answering questions, guiding people to legal aid, even sharing parts of my story anonymously. And with every person I helped, some part of me healed too. Because when you've had your trust stolen, your identity used like currency, your voice buried under guilt, there's something powerful in saying it stops here, not just for me, but for whoever comes next. 6 months after the ruling, I stood behind a podium at a financial literacy conference in Boulder, my hometown, looking out at a room full of faces I didn't know, but somehow understood. Some were young professionals, some were retired, some carried notebooks, others carried silence, but they had all come for one reason: to learn how to protect what they had built, often from the very people who helped raise them. The panel was titled, "When Helping Hurts: Navigating Family and Financial Boundaries." I was the last speaker, and when I stepped up to the microphone, my hands didn't tremble. Not this time. "I'm not here to tell you how to manage your bank account," I began. "I'm here to tell you how I learned to defend my name." I told them what had happened, plainly, without theatrics. I told them about the forged mortgage, the courtroom, the smear campaign, the silence afterward. I didn't speak from a place of revenge. I spoke from a place of clarity. of having walked through fire and learned that the worst burns aren't on the skin. They're in the space where love used to live. After the session, a woman in her 60s approached me, tears in her eyes. She whispered, "My son added me to his credit cards without asking. I thought I was the only one." I squeezed her hand and said, "You're not." That one conversation turned into a blog, a place where I could write what I had once been too afraid to say out loud. I called it Signed Without Consent. I wrote about guilt, about gaslighting, about the myths we carry around family loyalty, and what it costs to uphold them. At first, I thought only a few people would read it, but word spread. Emails poured in, from teachers, nurses, mechanics, even lawyers, people who had co-signed on loans, handed over paychecks, or paid rent for siblings who never said thank you. Some had lost their homes, others had lost their sense of self. I responded to every message. Not with legal advice, I wasn't a lawyer, but with language, with validation, with a sentence I knew many had never heard: "You are not selfish for wanting financial safety." In time, the blog became a bridge. I was invited to more panels. I began mentoring others in the SAFE group, and little by little, I became what I never had when I was in the middle of my own unraveling, a voice in the dark saying, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." One night, after a long day of back-to-back Zoom calls and drafting posts, I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet. The condo around me was still, no voices behind walls, no footsteps pacing with tension, just me, and the hum of a refrigerator I had bought with my own money. That's when it hit me. This peace, was the real inheritance I'd created. Not a trust fund, not a house, but a new pattern, a new lineage. Because the truth I'd come to understand was this sometimes: the most dangerous cycles in a family aren't the loud ones. They're the ones disguised as love, as sacrifice, as just helping. But love doesn't come with conditions, and sacrifice that's expected isn't generosity, it's control. When I walked away from my parents' house, I didn't just leave behind a mortgage. I walked away from a narrative that said, "Your worth is what you give." Now, I tell a new story, one where protection isn't selfish, where boundaries are a form of love, especially when they begin with yourself. Almost exactly 1 year after Judge Monroe dismissed the lawsuit, I received an email from an address I hadn't seen in over 10 months. Subject line: "Hey, if you're willing to read." It was from Laya. There were no accusations, no guilt, no blaming me for the foreclosure, the press, the broken holidays. Just a quiet message written in lowercase letters and uncertain pauses. She said she was in therapy, that it had taken her a long time to stop seeing things only through mom and dad's lens. She didn't make excuses, but she didn't apologize either. What she did say was this: "I'm trying to understand what I didn't before. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, I typed back a short, careful reply. "Thank you for telling me. I hope therapy continues to bring clarity. I'm wishing you well. Callan, no more, no less." I didn't open the door, but I didn't slam it shut either. That felt like growth. The rest of my life, by then, had taken on a rhythm that no longer included the people who raised me. And surprisingly, it didn't feel empty. In fact, it felt full, in a quieter, more deliberate way. There was my friend Talia, who now joined me on weekend hikes and still proofread my blog posts like they were Supreme Court briefs. There was Nana Celia, who sent handwritten notes every few weeks with pressed lavender tucked inside. And there was Rachel, the young woman from the support group, who had since gotten a job in nonprofit finance and now co-moderated the community with me. My chosen family didn't look like the portraits we frame on mantels, but it was real, and it was safe. We didn't expect perfection. We just respected boundaries. We let each other breathe. One Sunday morning, while making coffee in my kitchen, I stood by the window and looked out at the street, sunlight slipping through the trees, kids biking past in packs of 3. And I realized something I hadn't said aloud until then: I was no longer surviving my past. I was living in my future. And that future wasn't built on forgiveness I never received. It wasn't built on reconciliation or forced reunions. It was built on a single, unwavering truth I had learned the hard way sometimes. Real love begins with the courage to say no. No to patterns. No to silence. No to being the one who always gives, while others only take. That no had cost me a family, but it gave me something better, a self that I could finally call my own. I didn't get closure in the way people imagine. There was no apology, no family hug at the end, just space. Space to breathe, to rebuild, to choose who gets a seat at my table, not based on blood, but on respect. If you've ever felt torn between keeping the peace and keeping yourself safe, you're not alone. Drop a comment if you've ever had to choose between loyalty and self-respect, and what that choice taught you. And if this story resonated, don't forget to subscribe. There are more voices like mine, and maybe like yours too.